Up until recently, I didn't even know who Paul Harvey was. But this prophecy that he goes through on this Joe Rogan podcast is kind of mind blowing. And you can definitely tell that Joe Rogan is a little unsettled by what he's hearing. So let's go ahead and jump into this. You won't want to miss this.
If I were the prince of darkness, I'd want to engulf the whole world in darkness, and I'd have a third of its real estate and four-fifths of its population, but I wouldn't be happy until I had seized the ripest apple on the tree. Thee. So I'd set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first. I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of the serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve, do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince them that man created God instead of the other way around. I would confide that what's bad is
Already, right there, how crazy is that? I mean, I can't imagine that some of that wasn't going on back when he was broadcasting this, but just today's time is so much worse that we have so many people that want to believe a version of the Bible, but they don't want to believe the Bible. Let's keep on.
good, and what's good is square. And the old I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. And then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd threaten TV with dirtier movies and vice versa. I'd peddle narcotics to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with them.
He said he would tranquilize the rest with pills. I don't know how many things that I've watched on YouTube, how many news articles I've seen, how many people in general I've seen talk about the opioid crisis. And here we have someone prophesying the opioid crisis. Very interesting. And you could tell that this part specifically, Joe Rogan was kind of, wowed about because he said, wow.
Themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each in its turn was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellects, but neglect to discipline emotions. Just let those run wild. Until before you knew it, you'd have to have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door.
Holy shit.
Within a decade.
Now, as you can hear, Joe Rogan saying, holy poop. Yeah, it's kind of crazy that in 1965, before we had the first big school shooting of Sandy Hook, that he's talking about having metal detectors and drug dogs at schools, something that has been widely debated today, that many people go into huge debates over, is whether or not we should be treating our schools like an airport. And this prophecy saying stuff like that a good 20 years before it's even remotely considered is kind of mind-blowing. And as you can tell by the holy poo comment that Joe Rogan said, he thinks so too.
I'd have prisons overflowing. I'd have judges promoting pornography. Soon I could evict God from the courthouse, then from the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. And in his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I would lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd make the symbol of Easter an egg and the symbol of Christmas a bottle. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who wanted until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious.
Don't we already have this trying to start in the United States, where people are wanting to take from the rich and give to the people that want, basically taking away all ambition for somebody to really drive themselves to create new medicines and inventions and things like that. Back then in 1965, I can't imagine that we're to the point that we are today, but I don't really know the perception of back then, so maybe it was, but we're definitely to a point now where there's a lot of people wanting to take from the rich, give to the poor, take from the rich, and give to those who want. And here we have another crazy point that this prophecy is making.
You bet. I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich. I would caution against extremes in hard work, in patriotism, in moral conduct. I would convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun.
Wow.
That what you see on TV is the way to be. And thus I could undress you in public, and I could lure you into bed with diseases which there is no cure. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing.
What year was that?
Man, there's just so much to unpack in this prophecy. And the bad thing is some of the things that Paul Harvey says here, I think Joe Rogan might see himself in. Some of the things we might see ourselves in if we really truly think about it, especially the part where he's talking about turning churches and nations against themselves. Because we're to a point now that simple denominations that believe the same but have small differences, that believe the same gospel but split hairs over theology, small theology, not like the death and resurrection, but things like whether or not somebody can have a tattoo or whether or not a bottle or a glass of wine with dinner is a sin, can completely separate hundreds, if not thousands, of Christians and turn them against each other, hurting the ability for either one to reach their full extent of being able to reach people that do not know God, which is crazy that so much of this prophecy is so true today. Now, the one thing I think was probably the most mind-blowing was probably when he was talking about the schools. Because just whenever I went to school, early 2000s, or in the 90s to all the way up until even 2010, it was nowhere near as needing to have security as we have now. And in 1965, I don't even think there would have been any security at all, and if it was in any comparison as early 2000s and mid 90s. I really can't imagine that hearing stuff like this doesn't make Joe Rogan debate whether or not he wants to be a Christian, wants to start participating in a religion, because I know he's been on the fence as of lately, and stuff like this is just crazy. I know that God's got to be trying to reach him just based on some of the things that are happening in his podcasts, and the people that he brings on are drilling him over Jesus. So let's just pray that this continues to happen, where Joe Rogan is confronted with whether or not Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, which we all know that he is.